recorded live.
Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday, November 17th, 2010, and welcome back to Tim Turner's support call. As most of you know, Tim has not been able to be on the calls for quite a while, and so we periodically have guests to be with us. And tonight we have the long-awaited special guest with us tonight. And before I introduce him, just want to give you a little bit of rules on how to handle the call. If you have a question, hit star 8 so it shows up on my screen. And unless you're speaking, if you'd be so kind as to hit star 6 to mute out. And if you have to unmute for some reason, hit star 6 again. So, and again, I'd like to remind folks, if you're following Tim's processes and his, or you've been to his seminars and you still have some follow-up questions, please go to youhavetheright.com. We have over a year's worth of question and answers on this call from Tim, arranged by subject. So, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our very special guest tonight, who is a legend in the realm of commerce and the freedom movement, Mr. Winston Shrout. Hello, Winston. How you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Really good. It's really exciting to have you with us because you are very, very knowledgeable on a lot of the problems that people are facing, and you're very well researched, and it's just great to be able to have you here. And so I think tonight what we're going to discuss, since there's a lot of people that have IRS issues that are looking for effective and safe remedies to kind of get the IRS to go away or to resolve issues that they have so they can live their lives peacefully. Did you have any kind of a prelude or script that you wanted to start off with?
Yeah, actually I do. Perhaps I'll give a little bit of history of who and what the IRS actually is. I think a lot of people are confused about what they're dealing with when they hear the word IRS. And so I thought maybe what I'd do is go back in time, maybe about 80 years or so, and bring people up to speed.
Okay.
Well, as I mentioned, we have to go back 80 or 90 years in order to bring some kind of an understanding of exactly what it is that we're dealing with. And, there's a lot of buzzwords that go around, probably misunderstood. And so I think perhaps people draw the wrong conclusions in many instances because they use buzzwords that they have no idea where they came from or what they actually mean. So I think it'd probably be a good review, historical review, so that people can perhaps get a grasp of exactly what it is we're dealing with here. So I'll go back maybe as far as the early 1900s.
Okay.
And there was a lot of activity going on back there that you can't hardly find in the history books. But what it amounts to. And I'll use the term loosely, and the term I'll use is one world government. Now, before anybody jumps up and starts getting excited, let me explain that one world government has always been with us. And it's not a institution, it's not an organization, but it is, in fact, more or less the controlling powers on the planet, many of whom perhaps are private individuals, Some of them may be families, and so forth. And people like to throw around the word Illuminati and all that kind of thing without really knowing what it is they're talking about. But for the longest time, the world controlling powers, those who actually control the gold, it goes back to the same old thing we say, he who controls the gold makes the rules. And so that's the way that it's been for actually centuries. And perhaps even we ought to go back a little bit further into perhaps the 1700s, into the 1800s, to really discover the basis for this. And so as we go back that far, there is an interesting individual that pops up, and he's generally known as Saint Germain, or the Count Saint Germain. Now, he pops up in history, especially in French history, and he even pops up in American history at the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He is, in fact, the party that was referred to as the Old Professor. And so we have some interaction with Saint Germain in the founding of this country, this nation. But he principally pops up in Europe, very active during the French Revolution period, because there were certain things that he was trying to accomplish at that time, and which he did. But in any event, during the period we're talking about here, the perhaps late 1700s into the early 1800s, he was making an effort to combine the assets of the royal families of Europe and Asia. And his design in doing so was to basically stop war and to get these families to use the wealth that had been accumulated over the centuries for the benefit of the people on the planet. And he was successful in his mission and in his persuasion, because the ancient royal families and so forth decided to combine their wealth, and they commenced to intermarry and put their wealth into trusts. Now, this continued on down through the ages, and the intermarrying and so forth went on. It's kind of like a reverse family tree. And so certainly by the late part of the 1800s, this process had produced one man whom they had confidence in to administer the values that were contained in these trusts. He's loosely referred to as M1. In any event, M1, well, you can read a little bit of his history and so forth, but basically what had happened by certainly the early 1900s was that the wealth that had been accumulated, a good portion of it was actually taken into the Philippine Islands. And there it was hidden up in caves or whatever. I mean, I think everybody's heard the stories about all that. And it's an interesting story and so forth, and perfectly valid. But in any event, if you start to think about this whole concept as being, the one world government, what we're actually talking about is the assets held in trust, from centuries gone by. And so that wealth was being amassed at that particular period of time in anticipation of future events. Now, one of the things that was being undertaken with the use of those assets was the destruction or the removal of colonialism and imperialism. As if you go back and study history, you certainly see that many of the nations, principally England, Spain, France, Holland, and some of the others, had been circling the globe, and especially in undeveloped areas, had been involved in colonialism and imperialism to the detriment of the people so affected. And so one of the purposes, certainly, of the accumulation of this wealth and the administration of it was to prevent, stop, and reverse the effects of colonialism. Now, to facilitate this, as I mentioned, this wealth was accumulated. Much of it was stored in various places in the Philippine Islands. And as a result of that, to administer the revenue of that wealth, in other words, revenue means to change the place of. And so the word revenue here figures in very heavily. And so to keep track of the revenue, there was created back in the, let's say, 1920s or so. I'm not really sure the exact date of this, but there was the Bureau of Internal Revenue, which was created in the Philippine Islands. Now, what did happen in the 1930s, principally I believe in 34 and 35, was that the Bureau of Internal Revenue created and stored vast amounts of Federal Reserve notes. Now, these Federal Reserve notes were actually in the form of bonds, and they were in denominations of anywhere, the denominations were 100 million and 500 million bonds, complete with coupons. And some of the people probably listening to this call have maybe seen some of those facsimiles of some of those things, or maybe some of the people have actually seen some of them, themselves. But anyway, these were placed into boxes of certain values. Some of the boxes, which are referred to as the Treaty of Versailles boxes, actually have face value on the FRNs to be around 3 trillion. And the other Wells Fargo boxes are probably a whole lot less than that. But anyway, there were literally trillions upon trillions of Federal Reserve note/bonds that were created at that time for use in world commerce. A lot of people don't understand that the United States dollar is not a national currency. It's an international currency. The United States is probably the only country on the planet that does not have its own currency. And so what's called the U.S. dollar is actually international currency, and the basis for it is the FRNs that were created in I think 1935, and so that's the basis then for the Federal Reserve notes and things that are in use today as a world currency. So the whole basis then, when we start talking about internal revenue, is in fact the Bureau of Internal Revenue in Philippines, based upon the gold that was stockpiled there again, for the purpose of ridding the planet of colonialism. It was certainly in the interest of the Asian people, the African people, perhaps many of the South American countries, or certainly what we would call third world countries, that this colonialism should stop. Now, this was in anticipation of World War II. World War I and World War II were actually contrived wars. Anybody who studied World War I and World War II will certainly see that, that those wars were not based upon moral principles. They were simply commercial wars. And so, in anticipation of the Second World War, certainly, the what's called the New Deal under President Franklin D. Roosevelt was actually funded from this gold and so forth that had been accumulated in the Philippine Islands. And so, in 1933, we certainly have a change of events, as I'll describe here in just a moment. But certainly one of the things that happened in conjunction with this was the development as an offshoot from the Bureau of Internal Revenue. There was an agency which was created, which was known as the Internal Revenue Service. Now, this Internal Revenue Service is actually a trust that exists in Puerto Rico. Now, in today's world, the Internal Revenue Service, of course, is directly linked to the International Monetary Fund, and maybe I'll discuss that just in a moment. But in any event, in 1935, or let me make sure my date on this now. It's either 33 or 35. It's 33. In 1933, and we have the charter here to look at, but in 1933, the Internal Revenue Service from Puerto Rico moved onshore in basically what we call the United States. Anyway, it moved onshore as a corporation which was chartered in Delaware. And it became known as the Internal Revenue Tax and Audit Services Incorporated. So what we're dealing with onshore in the United States is a corporation which is chartered in Delaware, obviously for the tax for the tax benefits that come from a Delaware incorporation. So anyway, I'm explaining this history so that people will understand just exactly what it is that they are dealing with here in the United States when they're faced with difficulties. And that is, they simply have to understand that they're dealing with a corporation, and the connection to the corporation that they're dealing with is through the what's called the SS5 form application. Anyway, the SS5 is an application for a Social Security account. And that Social Security account, because obviously we're under bankruptcy, is handled as a trust. Now, on this Social Security trust, certainly it is based upon the birth certificate that is created by the state where you were born. Now, you have to understand that what we call the straw man was actually created by your birth state, and then through the SS5 form, the United States was able to subrogate the benefits that came from the birth certificate for its use. Now, as I mentioned, that SS5 form created a situation whereas the trust that was thus created is operated as a cestacea trust. And what that means is the cestacea is operated, for the beneficiaries. Now, on this trust, you are not the beneficiary of that trust. You are construed to be the trustee of that trust. And so the difficulty that most people are having is because they have not properly dealt with the trust that was created by your signature on the SS5 form. And so I've kind of brought it up current here. Tad, if you have some questions about the history of this situation, certainly I'd be happy to answer some of those if I know the answer.
Actually, a lot of what you've talked about is new to me. I've heard about M1 before. My understanding was that was from families all over the world, and that they had started that about 500 years ago. I don't know if that's the correct timeline or not.
No, that's probably a little bit. It actually was started. The movement to do that kind of thing was actually during the 1700s by Saint Germain. So it's actually only talking about less than 300 years.
Okay, and the M1 now is actually based in China, is what I've heard. Or the latest.
Negative on that. The evolution of that whole process. Well, let me just bring it down. Let me give some more history so that you'll understand. Now, those accounts and those trusts that claimed the ownership of the assets in gold and other precious, perhaps jewels and so forth and so on, for a long time was administered perhaps a little bit loosely. And M1 was, in fact, and I forgot his name. It kind of escapes me right now. He's referred to as M1, and eventually he was captured,
right,
and held hostage. And I think he died in 1928. And so around this period of time, and certainly leading up to the World War II, historically those assets were in a bit of flux. But again, the trust held the ownership of the assets and so forth, and so I would suppose that there was, much interaction by the trustees of those trusts and so forth in regards to these matters. And these things are handled certainly at the highest levels on a national basis and so forth. And so it certainly is not general information and it's not general news. But what did happen as a result of World War II, in conjunction with the original design, to eradicate colonialism, it was agreed upon in 1945 to create a commission to administer these accounts, for the benefit of the planet, and certainly as a safeguard against colonialism and so forth. A commission was created, and there were 3 trustee nations that were given pretty much unlimited power to administer these things. And those 3 nations were the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. And this commission was given for 50 years. Well, if you study the history, for that 50-year period of the U.S., U.K., and France, you'll find that they, in fact, did not fulfill their obligation to eradicate colonialism, but they simply just promoted it.
Right.
And so after the 50-year period was over with, the commission was disbanded and not recommissioned. And so the assets in 1995 were consolidated under an organization which is known as the International Treasury. It evolved into what's known as the Office of International Treasury Control. Now, the Office of International Treasury Control is actually administered under treaty through the United Nations treaties and so forth by one man who is known as, even though it's not his real name, it's the name that they have given him, but he is known as His Excellency Dr. Ray C. Dam. His principal location is in Asia. Many times he's in Cambodia or wherever. I think he's on the move quite a bit trying to get some of these things regulated. So in 1995, under international treaty, the sole responsibility in regards to the assets of these trusts were vested in one man. And so in 1995, he went to work to try to correct many of the problems that had been created by the 50-year reign of that commission. And so since 1995, certainly he's been working to try to get some of those things straightened out, and with a great deal of difficulty, it appears.
Okay. Because the people controlling those accounts have been raiding those accounts, and it's like they're addicted to crack. They don't want to give it up.
Well, most of the problems has been by banks and countries and so forth that did not have any right to use the assets, but simply counterfeited their right to use. Now, one of the purposes of the accounts, that came from the trust, the collateral accounts and so forth, the gold that was actually a part of that trust had been distributed through the world, and is in many instances is held by national governments. For instance, the gold that is supposedly in Fort Knox is on loan from the collateral accounts for the purpose that the country or nation or whatever to use that as a surety, for their commercial affairs, for which, for the use of that gold, there is a custodial, a premium, if I can use that word, or a rent for the use of the gold. And so that premium, of course, has to be paid back to source, which in this case is OITC. And in far too many instances, that premium is simply not being paid and being perhaps either misused or stolen. And so these are some of the problems that certainly come up, as these funds and these accounts and so forth are trying to be administered. So we certainly run into these problems as we go along. And I can't hardly imagine the headaches that have to go with that. But in any event, if you study the evolution of this whole thing, the gold that belongs to the trust was taken to Philippines, was to be the revenue of which was to be administered by the Bureau of Internal Revenue, and then in conjunction with that, and in conjunction with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, the Internal Revenue Service was created in Puerto Rico And then in conjunction with that, when they came on shore with that, they incorporated in Delaware as the Internal Revenue Tax and Audit Service. And so when you're dealing with things here in the United States as United States citizens, you have to understand that you're dealing with a corporation, which we generally refer to as the IRS, but the full name of that organization is, in fact, Internal Revenue Tax and Audit Service. And if you look at that word service, you'll simply recognize that what you're dealing with here is a debt servicer. And so that's what they're doing, is they're collecting on the debt that's owed on the premium for the use of the gold that's under control of, at this present date, the Office of International Treasury Control.
Okay. So, and that's what the income tax is?
Well, there's no such thing as income tax, so we ought not use that word.
All right. Well,
let me go back in history and explain another concept, and that is the concept of a constitutor. Now, back in 1933, because of the plan, the New Deal, there was a changeover in the currency, and there was also a changeover in the administration of the government. And so we had come from a substance-backed currency, which has been called execution of law, as in common law and so forth. Then after 1933, we went into operation of law, and we have in what we call public policy. Now, when FDR removed substance currency for use in commerce, what happened was that the remedy that they brought forward to replace the execution of law what's called discharge of debt. Now, this was fundamentally explained in House Joint Resolution 192 of the 5th of June, 1933, I think. Yeah, it's 33. And what it basically amounted to was the changeover into operation of law under public policy. Now, what happened at that time was the United States became a constitutor for the citizens of the United States. Now, that would be 14th Amendment type citizens. And so the remedy that was given to the United States citizens by the United States as constitutor was discharge of public debt. So that is the remedy that is available to all the citizens of the United States. Now, when we discharge a debt, the debt does not go away. It is simply put off to some future resolution. And so the debt remains, although the liability for the debt changes places. And so again, when we discharge a debt as a United States citizen, the liability for that goes back to the United States government. Now, this is what's called Treasury Direct. When we discharge a debt, Treasury Direct, in essence, we're talking about discharge back to the Office of International Treasury Control, because they are, in fact, the surety for the whole process. And so the discharge, that a citizen does, it discharges back to the United States, and then that liability for that debt rests upon the shoulders of the United States, and so the United States is the one that has to deal Treasury Direct with the surety, who in fact holds the gold by which all this commerce and so forth is carried on.
Okay. So if we could maybe go more into the kind of problems that people are facing and to hands-on remedy.
Sure.
I got some people on the board that are kind of itching to address their issues. So where can you take us from there?
Well, again, the reason why that I gave this history was so that people would understand the basis for what they're dealing with. And that is simply to demonstrate that what we're calling the IRS here in the United States is a corporation, and it is a debt servicer. Like a lot of people have gotten into a mortgage situation, and supposedly the mortgage was sold. Actually, the bank that you're probably dealing with on your mortgage is a debt servicer, in the same way that the Internal Revenue is a debt servicer. And so they're not the holder of the principal obligation. And so it's the same thing with the Internal Revenue here. They are not the holder of the principal obligation. And therefore they cannot claim, they cannot make the claim that they can actually enforce the debt because they're simply the servicer. And so people are, kind of barking up the wrong tree in many instances when they start to talk about, just what and who the IRS is, at least as it applies to the United States. And so again, the citizens of the United States, and I'll have to say that the citizens of the United States are generally that entity which is in all capital letter denomination. For instance, what people are calling their straw man. Uh-huh. And so the straw man then is the United States citizen, and so that is in fact who the IRS deals with. The IRS very seldom deals with a man or a woman, but they will always try to deal with the straw man entity on the basis that the man or the woman is the surety and or the trustee for that entity on the basis of their unqualified signature on the SS5 form. Now, it's a well-proven fact that the Internal Revenue Service is not a government agency, and they never have been. I mean, they were brought on shore in 1933, and they incorporated in Delaware.
Right.
So they are not an agency of the United States government, never have been, and never will be. So the best way to describe what people are calling the Internal Revenue Service is that they are a third-party debt collector. Now, does that ring any bells? Certainly, for those who have been around a little while and utilize some of the technology and so forth that we have been looking at, that you would certainly realize that the way to deal with a third-party debt collector is through Title 15 of the United States Code and not Title 26.
Because apparently Title 26 deals with internal revenue as opposed to the Internal Revenue Service.
Yes, you have to be very careful and look, people generalize, and that is, they do not make the distinction about just exactly who and what it is they're dealing with, and they sort of lump everything together in one big heap. But that's not correct. Again, if you're dealing with a third-party debt collector or a debt servicer, then the remedy is not in Title 26. The remedy has to lie in Title 15.
Okay, so tell us more about that as far as individual situations. If somebody's got a lien or levy against them, or they're getting threatening letters, and so forth.
Well, there's many ways to deal with that, and certainly a lot of we have developed over the years many approaches and many technologies to deal with some of these problems. And you can either do it on the private administrative side, or you can actually take the things into the public courts for resolutions to those problems. And so, anybody can pick and choose, whichever technique that they would think about to be perhaps the best solution to the problem. Now, one of the things that has been developed on the private administrative side is what is known as accepted for value. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but accepted for value is private administrative procedure. It's on the private side. And so you're dealing with the acceptance on the basis that you are, in fact, going to guarantee payment, or you're going to guarantee the effect of payment by using the accepted for value technology. Because what we're doing with the accepted for value is that we're taking an incomplete instrument. If you look in your UCC, I think it's Article 3, I think Section 115, where it talks about incomplete instruments. When any kind of presentment comes, such as from the IRS, comes through the mail, usually comes in the form of mail fraud, for those of you who don't understand that. But anyway, it comes, and when it comes, it's an incomplete instrument, which means basically that it has no charge associated with the instrument. And so what we're doing with the acceptance for value is that we're actually charging the instrument and making it into a complete or a negotiable instrument. And so using the acceptance for value process, and by also listing on our acceptance our pass-through account for the exemption, for the tax exemption, and then returning it back to the offerer, we have completely completed our duty and responsibility, and then it's on the head of the one who made the presentation to settle the account, because they have everything within their power now to do so. So we have been using the accepted for value technology for at least 12 or more years to settle many of the IRS incomplete instruments that they seem so fond of wanting to send to us. And again, because the public is not informed as to the true nature of that presentment, then they fall victim under admiralty to a summary judgment. So the acceptance for value process is actually based upon the fact that the United States government is operating a Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Now, Winston,
yeah.
Regarding to accepted for value, I hear many times over and over that people have taken their instruments, accepted them for value, and sent them back, but oftentimes with no results.
Well, as they suppose. Now, the first time that I used acceptance for value, it was in fact on an IRS situation, IRS presentments that were being sent to me, and it took two tries to get it done. And in another instance, I heard the story, even though I didn't know the gentleman, but I got it secondhand. But anyway, this individual had done an acceptance the exact same way 3 times before it was actually resolved. And so he had the interest of why that was, and so he actually called up and talked to some lady at the IRS and said, hey, you know, I did this thing 3 times in a row the exact same way. Why did it take 3 times? And the lady was frank with him and said, well, she said, we get this stuff coming in all the time. And she said, in reality, what we were doing was to see if you knew what you were doing. And so for that reason, they simply, you know, played ping pong with this situation. And then when the IRS, you know, finally became convinced that this individual knew what the heck they were doing, then they went ahead and adjusted the account as the acceptance for value had indicated. Now, you know, people, I'll have to say, you know, from my experience, that the vast majority of people who are attempting to use accepted for value technology probably have no idea what they're doing. And for that reason, actually, what I've done is I've put together, actually at this point, it's 4 separate DVDs on accepted for value technology, and we're adding to that information all the time. And so for those of you who are interested perhaps in getting a little bit more information, a little bit more grounding in what acceptance for value actually means, I would suggest perhaps you might go to our website, which is WSSIC.com, which stands for Winston Shrout Solutions in Commerce. And you can go on that website and look at the products and so forth, and there you'll find the acceptance for value DVDs. And I think you can either get them separately or you can buy all 4 of them, you know, for some kind of a, you know, discount price for getting all 4 at the same time. But I would suggest that if you think that you may not understand acceptance for value in any kind of depth, that you might secure that information and study it so you'll have a better concept of what it is you're doing with acceptance for value. Now, what we're doing, and there's many experiments going on, and all the time people are developing new approaches, perhaps to add a little bit of strength to the acceptances and so forth. And technically, there's really no reason to do so. But again, we always try to, you know, bring as many things to people's attention as possible. And so one of the things that most recently has come up, and this goes into another technology, but it deals with the use of postage stamps on the acceptances. Now, I don't want to get particularly into postal technology. That's a whole new thought process. It might take a great deal of time to develop.
That might be another call.
Yeah, perhaps we could do that at another time. But in any event, what's that?
I said, go ahead. Continue.
Okay. All right. Well, the purpose of using a postage stamp on an accepted for value document is to bring in an enforcement. Now, back in the, let's see, I can't remember the exact dates. I think maybe it's in the 1800s, maybe around 1840 or 70. And anyway, sometime during that period of time. I'm getting a bad echo here. Can you hear that?
Yeah, I was looking for it. Seems to have disappeared, so go ahead.
Okay. All right. Anyway, back during that period of time, the various nations decided that they would establish what was called the Universal Postal Union, and it was headquartered in Bern, Switzerland. And the purpose of that was to bring some sort of conformity or unity to the use of the postal services. And so under national treaties or international treaties, the Universal Postal Union was created, and they do have enforcement capability. And so the use of postage stamps on an acceptance for value is actually bringing in an enforcement on the instrument in the event that it is not properly processed. And so the use typically of stamps on acceptance for value is that a postage stamp is placed on the acceptance, perhaps on the lower right-hand corner, and then the individual will endorse through the postage stamp. And what that means is that they have canceled the stamp and closed escrow on the contract. And at that point, the party who does the cancellation by their signature through the stamp becomes the postmaster on that contract, and they also become the judge on that contract. And in the event that the contract is not honored, in other words, if the contract does not close escrow, and if they do not honor the acceptance and do the settlement as described on the document, then a complaint can actually be made to the Universal Postal Union, and inspectors will look into it.
Now, how well is that working?
Very well, from what I understand. I'll give another little nuance to accompany that, and that is the minimum denomination stamp that you could use in such a manner would be a 2-cent stamp. But we have had some conversations from some individuals, perhaps who actually work in that process, and generally I'll have to say that if you're using stamps, probably the best place to send those acceptances to would not be the IRS, but it would most likely be the United States Treasury CID. The United States Treasury CID is a government agency, and they have the charter to do set-off. And so as a result of that, if you in fact sent your acceptance to the United States Treasury CID, that might be a better way to go with that rather than through the IRS. Now back to the denomination of the stamp. 2-cent stamps will work, but it has been suggested that they categorize these acceptances that come in based upon the denomination of the stamp. In other words, the 2-cent stamp acceptances go to the bottom of the pile, and the $1 stamps on the acceptances go on the top of the pile. So if you're going to use stamps on your acceptances and send them to the U.S. Treasury CID, perhaps for a quicker turnaround, one might consider the use of a $1 stamp.
And where is the U.S. Treasury CID? Is it the 1500 Pennsylvania Avenue?
Actually, CID is all over the country. In some instances, they have major campuses like, Holtzville, New York, Memphis, Tennessee, Bensalem, Pennsylvania, and several different places. But generally, you can find a CID officer in all major IRS offices. You have to understand that the U.S. Treasury CID is the oversight for the Internal Revenue Service. And so where you find a major office, you'll most likely find a U.S. Treasury CID officer. Now, a lot of people have been sending their acceptances and some of their acceptances with stamps on them to the Covington, Kentucky.
Uh-huh.
CID office, I will suggest that probably they're getting backlogged. And so you might want to, send some of these things to some of the other offices, or actually just walk them in. If you find a CID office or an officer, there's no reason at all why you simply can't just. There's an awful lot of background going on there. Is somebody not muted out or something?
Well, yeah, and I've been trying to find them. They haven't been showing up, folks. If you're moving around and you got the phone near your ear or whatever, if you could hit *6 so we can get rid of the background noise. Now I went in. Now CID, is that the same as the IRS CID?
No.
Okay.
No, I specified United States Treasury Criminal Investigation Division.
Got it.
U.S. Treasury CID, not the IRS criminal investigators.
Okay, got it.
Not the same people, not at all.
Okay.
And for the most part, the reports I've gotten back from individuals who've gone in and dealt with U.S. Treasury CID, they say they're very pleasant to work with. I only have one bad report of somebody being treated uncourteously by a U.S. Treasury CID, and I even suspect probably that they were talking to IRS CI people rather than U.S. Treasury CID. But in any event, most of the reports I've gotten from individuals that they have been very helpful and have been able to get down to business and get things done. And so, if in fact you can locate some of these places where you can actually deal with directly a U.S. Treasury CID agent or officer, that might be the very best scenario to deal with some of these things. Otherwise, send it in.
Would they have one of those in Portland?
I'm sure they do.
I don't think they have one in Eugene.
They may or may not. You just have to check.
Small enough that they don't. But
well, you might check. Just call down to the local IRS office and ask to speak to a United States Treasury CID agent or officer, and just see if they have one there.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, the use of the postage stamps is a nuance that's been going around now for a little while. It's been in use for 100 years or more. A friend of mine actually went to a yard sale one day and just bought an old trunk, at auction at this yard sale. And he went home and opened it up. It had a lot of old papers and stuff in it. And he found some old bank checks from 1920 that had 2-cent postage stamps on them. So certainly in the 1920s, the people understood the use of postage stamps on negotiable instruments. So this has not been, this is not a new invention. It's just been something that's been kind of lost, to the people's general knowledge and so forth. But if it was viable in 1920, certainly it's viable in 2010. So again, if you want to add a little bit of extra effort into your acceptances for value and so forth, if you want to add a little bit of extra enforcement, perhaps the use of postage stamps might be something that people would want to consider.
I think so. So I got a gentleman on the board. He's asking, could you A4V threatening letters, like you better do this or
you can't. The only thing you can accept for value is a legitimate presentment. Somebody writes you a threatening letter. That's not a present. That's not an offer. That's a threat. And so, no, there's no reason to There's no reason to try to accept for value a threatening letter.
Okay. So you have to get a bill that comes with a coupon.
Or some other kind of statement.
Okay. So that's the A4V is one method of dealing with. Do you have any others that you would like to share before we go to questions?
Oh, sure. There's plenty of ways to steal. Like I mentioned, the acceptance for value is private administrative remedy, and if you needed to take it into the public, you could do so by using evidence rules and other things in a court situation, or perhaps, as we suggested in our last seminar we did down in Los Angeles, let's see, it was last month. No, let's see. No, it was this month. Yeah, the first weekend of this. Yeah, last week, man. I sure lose. I'm wore out, man. I can't already tell you where I'm coming or going. But anyway, one of the things that we had brought up there was the use of habeas corpus. Now, many people are confused about habeas corpus, in as much as they think it's only for prisoner release and that kind of thing. But habeas corpus can be used as a prove up on claim. Now, for instance, if there's some kind of let's say you get a tax lien. First off, it's illegal because it's not been properly, as the people in Oregon are well aware of, the tax lien in the county recorders is completely illegal. But anyway, if you wanted to go into a prove-up situation on that tax lien, you could certainly prosecute a habeas corpus in your state court and demand that the agency, the IRS agency or corporation, or whatever you want to call the thing, produce the original signature document that allows them to restrain your liberty. Now, we've kind of avoided habeas corpus for a long time, I think, because people didn't generally understand how it could be used. But habeas corpus is a civil action in a civil court before a magistrate, wherein a writ is issued for production of documents. And so the documents that you will be requesting for production are the original signature documents that allows the respondent to restrain the liberty of the petitioner. And I can almost guarantee you the IRS can't come up with that because it doesn't exist. Right. So when you go into the hearing on the habeas, you come in as the petitioner, as the moving party, and you would simply tell the judge, will you inquire of the respondent, is there a return on writ? In other words, have they produced all documents? And so then the judge would ask the respondent, have you returned the writ? And, of course, they can't because it's impossible. So the judge is going to tell you, well, no, there has not been a return on writ. That's the only thing you want to hear, that there has not been a return on the writ. And so now that has not been a return on the writ, then you would be petitioning the magistrate for an order to prevent the restraint of your liberty by the respondent in any manner, which certainly would include the removal of the notice of lien from the county recorder's office. You see what I mean? So habeas corpus could be used very handily that way if you wanted to go that route.
And any liens against bank accounts and whatnot.
Yeah. Now, and there are other ways. Like I say, years ago, back when I was young, there was a song that came out. It was called 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. Well, somebody needs to write a song called 50 Ways to Satisfy a IRS Problem, because there's a multitude of ways to handle these things. One report I got from a fellow down in Las Vegas few years ago, that he was handling all that IRS stuff by simply going to file a commercial lien against the IRS, and then taking his commercial lien into state court, for resolution and so forth. And he was very talented, and probably most people are not that talented to be able to do that. But there's another way. Another way we've been doing it is with bonds for discharge. In some instances, we send bonds for discharge to the back to the IRS. In some instances, we send those bonds for discharge down to the Secretary of Treasury at Puerto Rico. And we've seen success in going both directions. And so there's another way. And, I mean, you could, like I say, there's probably not 50 ways in existence right now, but certainly there are a number of different ways to handle some of these things.
I had a question. Well,
we've kind of gone past an hour already. So if you want to open up for a few questions, maybe we can continue on for a few minutes. But it's getting late where I'm at.
Okay.
So we'll go on for a little while here. But at some point, I got to go to bed.
No, you don't.
Oh yeah, I do.
All right. In Texas, I believe you're the first one to raise your hand. You're first.
Okay. Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Dad. Hey, Mr. Shrout, how you doing today?
I'm doing okay.
Okay. I'm having a problem with the IRS. I received a $5,000 penalty letter saying that if I don't recant what I did, then I'll have to pay $5,000 within 30 days. And what I did was I did a OID process for the years 2006 to 2009. And I received my refund for 2009, but for 2006, 7, and 8, I received that letter. So I was wondering what can I do to respond to them to receive my refund and, go from there.
Well, there's been a lot of conflicting results from the use of those 1099s. And probably most of the problem has been caused by people using their Social Security number on those forms, rather than using an EIN number. And I'm not going to go into all that, but probably if it were me, I think I might take that situation directly to the United States Treasury CID for resolution. I have heard, although I don't have firsthand knowledge, that many who were actually using some of those processes were actually sending all that paperwork, the returns and everything, directly to a Treasury CID rather than to the IRS. And they said it took a whole lot longer to get the whole thing done, but there seemed to be less hassle, dealing with Treasury than they had dealing with the IRS. So you might want to think about contacting a U.S. Treasury CID personnel and sitting down with them and try to work it out that way.
Okay. The only problem is I have a few days to respond to the IRS. So should I? Well, I know this is just.
Okay. You need to respond to them and simply object to what they're saying there. And keep the correspondence going and so forth. And as long as you are responding, certainly they can't. It's when you don't respond that you have the problems.
Right.
So go ahead and keep your response up, and then if it were me, I think I'd be going finding a Treasury CID personnel and seeing if you can't get it resolved through that manner.
Okay. That's good. I think I'll do that. But in the meantime, can I just send them a conditional acceptance letter saying that upon proof that this is correct, blah, 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 here is the corrected or the updated 1040X. And
rather than do a conditional acceptance, a conditional acceptance is a counterclaim, and it raises a controversy. If you go into all that trouble, why not just go do a habeas corpus and drag them into court and have them fess up that they don't have any original documents? Because if you continue on with the counterclaim, eventually to get it resolved, you're going to have to take it into court anyway. So if rather than go to all that trouble and paperwork and going back and forth on the counterclaim and all that kind of thing on the conditional acceptance, so why not just go ahead and take it straight into court on the habeas corpus?
Okay, I need to review habeas corpus then.
Sure. Well, if you
Winston, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you have that habeas corpus as a template in any of your documents?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Which you can find at wssic.com.
Well, the best thing to do would be to go on the website and send an email, and in the subject line, just put request for habeas corpus documents, and then I can get those to you.
Okay. And then you're right. You do need to study habeas corpus and understand it. The habeas corpus, that I have prepared it has absolutely no fiction in it. It's all written in fact, if you understand what I'm saying. And so you do need to understand a little bit about it, because again, the habeas that I've written here is not for use in a fictional court. And so this habeas has to be taken to a judge or a magistrate, and it would not necessarily appear, in a fiction. Matter of fact, I had done that habeas on a friend who was a prisoner of the U.S. Marshals, and I had sent that habeas to the U.S. District Court in Hawaii. That's where he was from, because I understood that the U.S. District Court in Hawaii was actually an Article III court. And so that's why I sent it there in the manner that I did. And so as it turns out, the Article III court is not staffed, and so the U.S. District Court took it over, and the judge sent it back with the comment that you have not given me a colorable remedy. Well, of course there's no colorable remedy in the thing. It was all in fact, and it wasn't in fiction at all. And so, from that experience, then the way the style of this habeas corpus is, I'm suggesting it needs to be taken on the state level and not used in the United States District Court situations.
My understanding is that the judges in the circuit court have dual roles. They also serve as a magistrate. You just have to invoke their duties as a magistrate. Is that correct?
Yes. It basically goes to oath of office, and a magistrate in a state situation is actually operating under the oath of office of a judge, because the magistrates don't have oaths. But in any event, keep it in the state level, and don't be trying to go into the United States District Court with this particular form of habeas corpus, because they'll just kick it back out. They can't deal with it.
Okay, so we're going to move on. We have Richard in North Carolina. You're next.
Okay, thanks. Hi, thanks. Hello.
Go ahead.
I was wondering how any of these processes may relate to state departments of revenue, and whether they are corporations or are they actual. Well, since the state government's a corporation, I guess they have to be a corporation too. I'm not sure, but how would you handle the state issue?
In the same way. For those of you who follow TalkShoe presentations and so forth, David Clarence, the county notary, has come up with some very good information how to deal with some of those state issues. And I've looked over that technology, and it looks very, very promising. And you might want to go and look at what he has presented, from the position of executor.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked it over real close, and it looks very, very promising. I can understand. We've been kind of skirting around that for years and years, but he came up with the linchpin on it, and so I've looked at that with particular interest, and it looks very promising.
And one more question. With respect to the IRS, I remember reading one of your articles that I really enjoyed, where it made the distinction between the the Internal Revenue Bureau and the IRS and so forth, and that you needed to attack them in terms of their collection agency function and not the Title 26. And I was wondering, since you also provided a validation letter that they had to validate the loan, validate the debt, and that they couldn't do that. Can you take a complaint into a local, state level or county level civil court, and with a complaint against them when they don't produce that, and thereby receive a judgment against them because they would probably not appear?
Yeah, there's two ways you can handle that. Perhaps you want to make a civil complaint, or for those of you who are talented, you might in fact want to bring a criminal complaint. Now, criminal complaints are just a little bit more difficult, and it would certainly start out with an affidavit for probable cause, and it would go into the county attorney or perhaps go to the state attorney general for prosecution. So, yeah, you can attack that thing, either civilly or you can attack it criminally, based on the situation. And again, one of the major ways to attack some of that problem is through the UPU for mail fraud, because they're soliciting fraudulent contracts using the Postal Service to do so. And so that does bring down criminal implications on mail fraud. And so you may, in fact, want to make a complaint to the UPU through your local postmaster. So like I say, there's 50 ways to leave your levers.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'll get off.
Okay, Tad, maybe one more, and then we got to break off here. I got to go to bed.
Okay, Winston. South Central Florida, when your phone unmutes, it's your turn. Okay, in Florida, your phone just unmuted. It's your turn.
Thank you. Thank you. I commend you and salute you, Winston. I'd like to know one thing. You at the San Antonio seminar, I believe you stated that the birth certificate had a value of $650,000 in $1,923 and at 6% interest from date of registration. Can you tell me where that might be stated, or in the stock or something?
It's by implication. And the reason why I say it's by implication is because the tax exemption on the estate at the death of the man is way back when it was $680,000 on the exemption at death. And so if there's an exemption on the death certificate, which is a negative number, then on the birth certificate there have to be what? There have to be a positive $680,000. Now in today's world it's probably $1 million or $2 million or something like that. But again, that by implication, it's readily seen that there has to be that equalization there.
Right, I got you. What else can I ask? Boy, I hate to be the last one and not come up with something really outstanding to ask you. And I'm sorry I missed part of the call. Boy, I'm really taken back by missing you at this opportune time.
I think they record this, don't they, Tad? Isn't it in archive?
Yeah, we are being recorded. Absolutely.
Okay. You can go back and pick that up then a little bit later on.
Yeah, that would be great. When we were talking about the bonds for discharge, are these bonds are we seeing the ones that they have? They're supposedly like behind their oath of office, or
no? This is actually a bond that we create and send it to the appropriate place. In many instances, we've created that bond for discharge and send it right straight back to the IRS office, that where the lien originated from. In some instances, we've actually sent it to Puerto Rico, to the Secretary of Treasury there. Sometimes it takes forever in the day for it to get it done. But like, for instance, I think the one time when we sent it down to Puerto Rico, it was something like 3 or 4 months. But at the end of that period of time, they got a document from the IRS, which was release of lien, and certainly they released the lien out of the county recorder's office. So again, just depending on what you understand and what you would like to, how you would like to resolve the problem. There's several ways to resolve these problems, and if you try it one way and it don't seem to work out, try it another way.
Right. Well, let me ask you one more. Say we have, they're offering a piece of real estate, and we accept that offer, in full, and come back at them. Would this be something like that we could use a bond for discharge and
are you talking about? Well, I'll put it to you this way. Yes, I know some people who have attempted to go that way, but it did not work out. But however, some who have gone to, for instance, a sheriff's auction and bid on some real estate and then presented a promissory note to cover their bid, they in fact were successful. So again, a lot of these things you just have to work with and see what happens. But you don't know till you try, now do you?
Right, no, sir. And then how about an A4V on the offer that they, present to us? And we accept,
well, if you're dealing in real estate, one of the main things that people get mixed up on, especially with a real estate offer is they're doing the acceptance of the offer, but they're not opening up an escrow. And so you have to open up an escrow so you can actually get possession of the property. And so it's more complicated than what you might think. And so a lot of people, are misinformed about how that would work. And we certainly don't have time to go over all that, on the air here tonight. But no, if you're trying to do a real estate transaction with an acceptance for value, I will suggest to you that it will not work.
Oh. How about for I'm without automobile or
same thing. No. You're gonna get yourself in trouble with some of that stuff, and so don't be trying that. So that was your last question, right?
Yeah.
Well,
I think it was.
We come out of pocket again. Huh?
All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate your questions tonight. Winston, it was really great having you. You're a wealth of knowledge. It's been a fantastic evening. Will you come back and join us again?
Yeah, we can do it again sometime. We're kind of going into the Thanksgiving season right now. It might be just a little while before we could do it again, but if you'll make the appropriate contact, I'm sure we can arrange something.
All right. Well, great. So anyway, thank you very much for being here, and we do look forward to you returning, and have a good evening and have a good night's rest.
Amen to that, brother.
All right, Winston. Thank you very much. And folks, thank you very much for being on the call tonight. We had a great turnout. And again, Winston Shrout can be found at WSSIC for Winston Shrout Solutions in Commerce. That's WSSIC.com. And like you said, if you're interested in the habeas corpus, just send an email. Go to his website, send an email with habeas corpus in the subject line. And, of course, if you'd like, if you're following Tim's processes and you have more questions about it, you're more than welcome to go to youhavetheright.com and join up. So that's it for this week, folks, and we will see you again next week. And thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.